A huge thanks for letting me be here. It's a real honor to be able to talk to you all. It's my first SciPy, and this community is really inspiring. I feel like in so many ways you're really embodying open science in in everything you do. So huge thanks for letting me come and speak to you all. So hi, I'm Abby. Abicab's on most of the internet, except for GitHub, which confuses a lot of people. I'm a Cabunoc on GitHub. But I'm the person really excitedly pointing up to the sky. I'm not the other guy, in case that was confusing. But I'm the practice lead for Working Open at the Mozilla Foundation. So a lot of what I do is researching and practicing best practices of working open, mentoring people, running programs, and helping people just work more open. Because I really do think that as a community, if we are working openly, we will have more innovation, and everything will be better. So first, I opened the dictionary. I'm kidding, I Googled. Tried to look up what sustainability is. And the definition that they had is, that Google had, is the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. And to me, this really is like survival. Like, can you run your project in a way that it survives over time? And I like to think of it like a balance problem. So if on one side you have like all the work that needs to be done and all the money you need to buy things, and on the other side you have the people doing the work, the people giving you the money and the time for all this stuff, can you balance it in a way where it's not, you don't have more work than people? Or this way, you want it balanced. So that's what we're going to explore today. And when I talk about open leadership, this is a definition we use. Open leaders design and build projects that empower others to collaborate within inclusive communities. And I want to highlight a couple words in here. So the first is the word design. I think that when you're running a project, you do have to be pretty intentional if you want something to be sustainable, to be open. You have to design and plan for this beforehand. Sometimes magical things can happen by accident, but it really helps if you're designing things and setting things up to work longer term. And the other word I want to highlight is empower. A question I often get about open leadership, especially when talking to open source communities, is why do you focus so much on the leaders if open source is like this community thing and this co-creation thing? Why are you talking so much about open leadership? And I think in any community, or any time you're working on a project, there's always these power dynamics, even if they aren't spoken, so it's always there. So sometimes it's better if you just label it, and by empowering others, when you do have power inside a project, it really makes things easier to collaborate and people to co-create and come together. So this definition really takes from that co-creation ideology from open source, and just that when we are working together, we can make something better. So we're going to talk about balance and design and empowering. So first I'll talk about the balance piece, then talk about maintaining that community when you figure out the balance. And then afterwards, if we have time, I might talk a bit about movement building, because I know a lot of people in this room talking about open science or working with bigger communities, so I wanted to touch on that a little bit. So first up is balance. So one of the tools we use when I'm mentoring people who are starting out with their open projects, or just starting out with mentorship, is this open canvas. So it's remixed from Lean Canvas, which is a one-page business plan for people using startups, starting a startup. But in this case, it's for a one-page way to figure out what it is you're working on as an open source project. And I find it's a really nice exercise to work on, especially if you're working with a group. In the first box we ask you to fill out is actually problem. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Because you need to make sure that there's an actual need for what you're making. Otherwise, there will be no way for you to sustain this if no one else sees that this is something that actually is needed in the world. At best, you'll have a hobby if there's no real problem being solved. But that's the first step, figuring out if there's an actual need for this and what the problem is. The next box you fill out is the solution, and you can approach this in a couple different ways. The first way is you write down what you think the solution will be in your full imagination, what you want to make. The other approach is if you are worried about sustainability, or you are just starting out, what's the most efficient way to solve the problem? And start with that as your solution, and then you can build on that later. So thinking back to that balance sheet, it's just lowering the amount of work that needs to be done, if you can. And that's different for every project, so I'm not going to dive too much into that. The next box is key metrics. I often don't spend a lot of time on this, but it is super important, so you should all spend time on this. But thinking about how will you know that you are making a difference, that you are working towards a solution and actually getting somewhere. And this is really important when you're working with community members and you're trying to show them that their contributions matter, that they are doing something that's good. If you can point them back to this key metric and say like, oh, you helped us reach this, it makes a big difference with your community. And then this bottom, this green box, is really where I think that balance piece is. So knowing what problem you're solving and like what you're building, what resources do you need to build that? So thinking about like, do you need developer time? Do you need designers? Do you need data? Like figuring out all the resources there and then making sure that it's matched over on the contributor profile side. So making sure that if you did write design help, you actually put in like some sort of designer in your contributor profile. And then just like see what actually community you need to be able to execute on your plan. So the rest of the boxes, yeah, I also have another one for users. I know some projects, your users and your contributors are a little closer together, but here it's separated, just in case. And then we have user channels and contributor channels for you to start thinking about where you are going to get contributors, where you are going to get users. And I'll break that down a little bit more in the next section. But this is where you can like start brainstorming. And the final box, the very top, I know I don't go through, it's like a weird order you go through it. It's fine. It's the unique value proposition. It's a very businessy term. But now that you know like what you're solving and who your audience is, you can just try to write a simple statement that says what you're doing and why it's different. And you can have different statements for all the different audiences you have, but this will just help you, figure out how to communicate your project and tell people what it is. So that's our canvas. Welcome, people. All right, so now that you sort of figured out like kind of what you need in the community, or even once you have a bunch of people together that are working on this project, this is where I feel like a lot of projects sort of stop. They're like, oh, we have a great community. I don't need more contributors, or like, I have this, we're good. You have to do a lot of work still maintaining that, even if you already have them. So that's our next part, which is maintaining community. And something I learned actually when I was a student in a university. So I was doing a lot of community organizing with different student clubs. And what's interesting on campus is when you're doing, like, your audience is undergrads, you often only have like a 4-year span with these people, give or take. Some people take a while to graduate. But something I noticed, or I learned really quickly, is if you ever have a year with your club that you don't recruit any freshmen, then 3 years down the road, you're gonna have a huge leadership problem. There'll be no seniors to run your club, and then your club will probably disappear. So it's always good. So this is our mountain of engagement. So I think for any community that you have, even if you already have a good amount of people in there, make sure you do have, one, it's new people coming in, and that's the bottom of the mountain. And then 2, like a way for people to level up that mountain. This is great for like retaining people, and because people always will leave your project. It's not as obvious as it was on campus where I only had 4 years with people, but people like get families, get new jobs. Don't expect that people will stay there forever. And I'm really glad I came after the burnout session, so I think that's like a nice segue. So this. People will burn out if you expect them to stay there forever. Whew. Yeah, so these are the slides I made this morning, everyone. Here they come. So, to break down this pathway up the mountain, welcome. These are several phases we use in like community building. And it starts with discovery. Like, how do they first hear about your project? Is it Twitter? Is it an email? Do they meet you at a conference? First contact, is it like in the mailing list, or did they say something in chat or on GitHub? Participation, when do they start actually like interacting with your project? Sustained participation, they've done a few things, maybe a pull request. Then networked participation, they start inviting their own friends, maybe they start helping onboard others. Then finally leadership, which I think you could break down even more, and I think there's a lot of stages in leadership, but I'm not talking about that today. You can ask me about that later. But yeah, leadership, and that can be anything from like being in charge of booking the room every week to like running the entire project. So An exercise that we do with open leaders when we're mentoring people. We ask them to do a little personas and pathways exercise. So if you remember the contributor profiles from that canvas, you can make a persona out of that, or an imaginary person who fits that profile, and you can imagine a pathway for them. So if you had a designer, you think about how would a designer discover your project? And this is actually pretty tricky if it's like a scientific project, like why would a designer hear about this in the first place? So you have to be kind of creative. And then you start to see barriers. Where do people get stuck? Do they get stuck trying to participate? Do they get stuck trying to get into leadership? And this way you can start taking out those barriers. Today I'm going to go through and just talk about some best practices as you go through each of the steps, which is a lot of what open leadership is, I think. So first one, going into discovery. For an open project, have a public repository, have an open license, and then maybe some promotion. So if you put it on GitHub and you never promote it, it will be kind of hard to find. So this could mean a lot of things. Yeah, this one's the most self-explanatory. So I'm going to move on. So how do people get from discovery to first contact? So I find that most people come to a project because they really care about your mission, or they have that same problem and they're excited about it, so they come. But it's a problem if you haven't articulated a clear mission or a clear vision. So that's why you need to spend a little bit of time thinking about what it is you're doing, or use that unique value proposition from the canvas to really explain, why people should get involved. And then other things, like having a communication channel so that people can contact you. If you just put your project up there and there's no way to reach you, they won't contact you. And having a README, I think, is important for an open source project. And then from first contact to participation, this is where a lot of drop-off actually happens. So personal invitations are actually really important. And a lot of research shows that you're up to 4 times more likely to contribute if you've had a personal invitation. So there's some citations I'll have at the end. So it's really interesting. And some people get invited more than others. So really being intentional about who you invite to contribute, I think, can make a big difference in your project. And aside from the personal invitation, there's like standard things for passive people coming through, the contributing guidelines and code of conduct. And even after you personally invite someone, it's good for them to have that documentation to know like how they can contribute in your community, and like what you do care about and what you do stand for. So it's good to have these, even if you are like personally inviting people. Oh yeah. Sorry, I feel like my drinks are so long. They're not? Okay. Another thing with this, between first contact and participation, I want to mention, because we are at a conference, there is this 24-hour rule after first contact. If you don't respond within the first 24 hours, there's actually a huge drop-off in the likeliness that they'll come and participate. Like if you don't follow it up with that personal invitation. And if you don't follow up within a week, it's like almost 0. So if you met someone at the conference and they're like, oh, what a cool project, within 24 hours after SciPy ends, you should probably contact them. But it's great that there are sprints, so you're probably gonna like contact them tomorrow during the sprint. Yeah. So, yeah, contact people quickly. This is like a time-sensitive step. The others aren't as time-sensitive, so don't worry. Then between participation and sustained participation, so someone comes into your project, why do they come back? A lot of times it's recognition, like thank them for their work and show them how their work is really connecting back to what you are doing. So I mentioned the metrics from the canvas. So if you can tie it back to the metrics and show people, it's like, oh look, you helped us get a little closer to our goal. That's really powerful. Marshall Gans, he's a political theorist. He talks about like in a political campaign, you'll have canvassers. And say you've canvassed like 100 houses. Then you go to the headquarters and someone just like takes, I don't know what they have. What is this? Oh, clipboard. Someone just takes their clipboard and like throws it in a pile and they're like, thank you so much. And that could be the most heartfelt thank you. But it doesn't really show that you've contributed to anything. So, but what if, instead of just throwing it in a pile, they like looked at your clipboard, tallied it all up, added it to the board, and said, wow, with all of your stuff put together, we've reached 1,000 people today. That's amazing. So really showing people how their work leads up to something bigger. People like that. And then they're like, oh, I'm not wasting my time on this project. It's actually helping. So it's great to do that. And then match skills with interest. Be sure to check in with your contributors and do they have the right skills for this job, and is this what they want to do? Maybe they're interested in a different part, so make sure you are paying attention to them. Then between sustained and networked participation, I think there's a lot of ways this could happen, but the ones I put down, there's training and professional development. So if they don't have the skills needed for a specific part, maybe offer some training or some mentorship. And if that training is how to onboard other people, that really, then they are suddenly networked participation because they're helping others get onboarded. And this can go a long way for retaining people because they are actually learning a real skill that they can use in their professional lives. So it's always helpful to be able to offer that somehow. Then for this last step, from network participation to leadership, I think this is another personal invitation. Not a lot of people will just show up and start leading in a project on their own if there's already other leaders. And this is where I think you can use your power as the leader in the project to empower someone else to do that. And something that's great with after I was listening to the talk, empowering someone, it's almost succession planning. As you're helping other people take leadership on, you're expecting that you will be gone someday. So that made more sense in my head, but yeah. Next part is setting clear expectations. So when you're asking someone to do leadership, be sure that they actually know what's expected of them and how much work there is. I know Tanya shared the inclusive leadership cycle that we use at Mozilla, and most of it is stuff that's in this recognizing them, onboarding them. But another step that I really like is the renew step. So when you invite someone to leadership, if possible, I know it's not always possible, see if you can do it for a fixed time period where you can renew it for the next time, so someone's not committing to do something for the whole rest of their lives. Because it really hurts both you and the project if the person just sort of flakes out and no one knows what's going on, and then that part of the project lingers. But this way, if you're constantly renewing it, you can keep better tabs on what's going on, and people can plan their lives better. If they know they have a kid coming the next year, they might step down or not renew. So it's easier for them to step down, actually. It creates a nicer way to step down, because it is a big barrier to say, oh, suddenly I can't do this anymore. I'm really bad at doing that. But if just not renewing something is much easier. And then pay attention to that value exchange. So they're giving a lot of time to be part of leadership in your project. What are they getting out of it also? And making sure that you're recognizing them, that they're still enjoying the process, and making sure it's an equitable value exchange. So, great. Here's the whole pathway. Yay, so many things. And I think all of this really leads to that survival piece. It's what you need. You need a bit of that pathway to keep your community going. But I know there's a lot of people looking at movements here. And if you want something that's really leading to culture change or will grow more exponentially, that's why I wanted to talk a little bit more about this movement building piece. And just the strategy that you can use to expand your reach a bit quicker, if that makes sense. So I thought I'd use an example from a project I work on. So I run Mozilla Open Leaders, which is a 14-week training on training and mentorship on open practice. It is changing a bit this year, but generally it's 14 weeks. You get some upfront training, you're paired with a mentor, and then you get some practice in the end. And so every dot on here is a person who's gone through Open Leaders. And the part I want to talk to you about, it's the orange dots. Oh, the colors are a little off here, that's fine. So the orange dots at the bottom, these are the people that went through the program, but they enjoyed it so much, they came back and they mentored others to go through it. So a common movement building strategy is to invest in people who can multiply themselves. So by investing in these mentors who are able to create more mentors over time, we were able to sort of scale the project a lot faster than we would have otherwise. And it wasn't just me mentoring everyone. So that first round in 2016, that was just me and my colleague Aurelia, and we mentored individually all those dots at the bottom. But by empowering them to go on and create more mentors, we're able to scale and able to accept more people who could like keep on mentoring others. So often in like community organizing, they ask the organizers to replace themselves. So if you have someone organizing something in a city, they'll have to find their own replacement before they go on and then organize something in a different city. And you're able to scale a bit further that way. So if any of you are running movements, that's a strategy. And just talk a little bit about the future of Open Leaders. So for Open Leaders X, which is coming up, it's X, super fun. We do want to sort of scale that a different way now. So we are trying to see if we can train people to run their own cohorts of Open Leaders. So we're getting more demand for people who want a specialized cohort around, say, open science or open hardware or tech policy. So we're looking for people who want to run something in like AI. Healthy AI is going to be one of the cohorts. If you're interested in that, please apply. We're looking for people. So here's a bunch of resources with things I used in the talk. And work open, lead open. WOLO. So thank you all so much. And I have slides for a whole different talk if you have other questions.
You mentioned this renewal, how it's easier to let someone go if they have to renew something versus making them take the action to step down.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if that, I mean, because I would expect that, you know, I'm a guy who, if I have to renew something, then I just don't do it again. And so I could imagine that actually churning leaders faster than maybe you want, or I don't know if you have any like the negative effect of such a thing, or if it is a good thing even there.
Yeah, so for the mentors and here in this one. So for each round that we run, I do ask the mentors each time, do you want to mentor for these next 3 months? And it's only specifically for those 3 months. And then they'd have to sign up again for the next after that. And because I rely so much on the mentors to take these one-on-one calls with their mentees, like I don't want someone who's not going to remember to register because they have to be responsive enough to like make a call. Yeah. So I think we do lose people for sure. Because if it was everyone that just said, yeah, I'll volunteer for something, then we would have scaled way more, but I think we would have had a lot more flakier mentors who just like never showed up. Yeah.
Actually, a really quick extra thought to what Andy just said. One thing that we've done is don't say like, oh, you'll be on the team for 3 months and then you'll get kicked off the team unless you want to. We'll have like, I think we call it the green team, which is like people who used to be on the team and who are still on the team, but they're just in like a non-active role. It's like that kind of thing makes it easier. But the question that I had for you was, I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about how you can reach out to members of the sort of broader open community that do work that isn't part of like what most people would think of as what a project is known for. Like, for example, designers or community managers in the context of like an open source coding project.
Right. Yeah, that's really tricky. And I find often, especially for designers, I have to go to like a specific open design group. And there you'll find people who are passionate about like open source in design. And there's at least that overlap, even though they might not care enough about your project specifically. I think it's tricky. If you have like a very niche project and you want to get like a design help, it's that overlap. It's hard. So sometimes you just have to pay for it, I think. Yeah. But for community organizing, I find that's a little bit easier especially if you provide training. Yeah. You can send them to open leaders.
Hi. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thanks.
I just had a sort of question comment, I guess, about bringing new people into leadership in like other community volunteer roles that or like involvement I've had. I noticed quite often you bring someone in to sort of try it out, and they'll maybe shadow, say, like a treasurer of a club or something. That's always hard to fill.
Yeah.
And maybe shadow that for a year. And that way they can say, oh yeah, I'll continue, or maybe after 2 weeks, or 2 months, they're like, oh, that's way too much work, and then they drop out, and it's no skin off anyone's back. The club's still going to keep running.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's like the extension of that mountain of engagement. Like, are there levels you can invite people into that like lower leadership tier and then slowly bring them up? Within Open Leaders itself, like we invite people to come as mentors a few times before maybe we'll ask them to be a cohort host, where they're in charge of like a whole group, of like a bigger group of people suddenly. And then after that, maybe like the OLX stuff. But yeah, that's a great point.
First, thanks very much for the talk. You've just changed what I'm going to be doing at the sprints tomorrow. I'm wondering, you started with saying like you have to design for this, and many of the people here will be involved in projects that kind of grew organically, and so you kind of, if you want to do this, you have to kind of retrofit the design onto an already maybe fairly old or unwieldy project. And I wonder if you have any experiences with that.
Yeah, we have had a few people come through Open Leaders after their projects fairly mature. And I find even in the, so I forgot how many slides I have. Here we are. Even if you already have a mature project, you can still fill out this open canvas and figure out which parts you still need to tweak a little bit. So knowing where your contributors are now, it might identify some people that you still need, or it might highlight how it is imbalanced. So I think you can still do it. It's tricky to change, especially if you're like trying to change a license and stuff. You need a lot of permission from people. So it'll be, you'll have to have patience, and it won't go as fast as like a project starting from the ground up. But I think you can still do it. If you have more specific questions, feel free to talk to me.
Yeah, to kind of follow up on that, I find that a lot of these talks are based or prefaced on the assumption that the leadership itself is healthy and non-toxic. So there are older organic projects that are not, good in that regard.
Yeah.
And there's a very, very big power imbalance, right? That the people who might want to change and be healthy don't have that authority. And so if you have any advice or kind of in your experience, if you've come into that, what to do? Yeah,
that's a really good question. What do you do if you want to change the culture from within, but you're not quite at the top yet? I think you can do a lot within your area of influence in the project, and I would focus on what you can change. So often I've seen people use the open canvas just for a feature on a project, or just for something that they do have control over, and they can start to really show that like having a more diverse team or being a bit more open on different things really leads to some success. And I find over time that changes the minds of the people on top if they're open to it, but not, So that's my advice, but it's a tricky situation, Yeah, and I think that's also why you often need buy-in from the top. So a few years ago, we ran a partnership with the MIT Open Leadership Camp, where they had a bunch of CEOs come through and do similar open leadership training. They actually used this canvas, and they found they needed the CEO on board, but then also a project manager who's actually running something inside to sort of get that culture to shift within the organization. When it was just the CEO, they had no time to actually implement anything, and if it's just the project manager, there's no buy-in from the top. So that's the best scenario for success, but yeah, I understand you don't always have that. Cool. Well, I thought I would take longer with my talk slides, but if there's any more questions, then I think we're done. Thank you all so much.